I mean that relatively speaking, because obviously, it goes without saying. I mean, when we talk about the fact that it's going to be rainy here and windy and everything else, that pales in comparison to what our friends. And I think when you live in Indiana, obviously, virtually everybody has some connection to the state of Florida or just the coastline down there in general, just due to spring breaks and, family, retirees, everything else. So goes without saying that we hope everything is okay in that area. But the weekend here, obviously for the Colts game, it's not going to be of impact. But high school football games, our pop-up pickleball event that was going to be taking place tomorrow has been postponed to a later day because, the outdoor courts are going to be wet. They didn't know if they'd be able to get them all the way dry. So there are a lot of things that we'll keep an eye on in that regard. But the real attention, the real focus, if you will, for today for us is going to be talking about the Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers at Lucas Oil Stadium and the fact that, the Steelers, Jimmy, I think this is an interesting and intriguing game because they kind of feel to me like college football's, I don't know, kind of like Indiana maybe, and the fact that you have to pay attention to the record to be impressed by it, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like Indiana in college football at 4-0. There are people still that are like, yeah, but it's Indiana, and have they really beaten anybody? The UCLA win's okay, etc. And people are kind of waiting to be, you got to prove it to me, right? And for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Missouri is the show-me state, but it feels like Pennsylvania should be because the Steelers, it's kind of like, you still got to show me something. They're unbeaten, but it almost feels like of the unbeaten teams, not only because you didn't expect them to be there, but it's not like they're dominating people. It feels winnable for Indianapolis, but a big part of that, Jimmy, let's be real, is going to be coming down to disrupting things and maybe getting Justin Fields a little off kilter, and that's going to rely upon who we actually find out is available for the Colts in terms of their defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, we're still waiting for the practice to take place today and then the practice and injury report to follow and waiting anxiously to see what happens with Kenny Moore and Kwity Paye, because if you take them off the table and you go against a Pittsburgh offense that, has not been elite by any stretch of the imagination, but they have been serviceable, and Justin Fields has looked the part as a quarterback of finding a new opportunity and doing just enough to get the job done while not doing anything to make life harder for their defense, which has been the backbone of, Mike Tomlin-led teams for years. But if you're looking at a combination of Leatu Latu, Grover Stewart, Tyquan Lewis, instead of throwing in Kwity Paye in there and maybe not having Kenny Moore in your secondary, who's one of the few pieces, along with Juju Brents, you can truly believe in that cornerback room, you're just asking for more potential problems against a Steelers offense that still has the ability to make you pay. But to your overall point, where the playoff picture stands right now and looking at this race in the AFC, and to be clear, I'm not talking about, how many games are must win or anything like that. That's not the label I'm talking about. I just mean, if you're looking now, 3 games into the NFL season, and you're examining the AFC and where you stack up and using different barometers for where your standing is in the conference, I look at the Steelers, the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Texans, 2 top 5 teams in the AFC, or all top 5 teams in the AFC right now, and the Steelers are the team that, I don't think they're a second weekend playoff team. I think they're a wild card team that winds up getting bounced. They don't scare me. I don't think they're a real threat to the top of the AFC, but to teams that are in their wheelhouse, like the Colts, this is going to be a tough test. Anthony Richardson has documented accuracy issues. That's no news to anybody. Life is going to likely be miserable for him against a Mike Tomlin-led defense with Minkah Fitzpatrick, with TJ Watt. How do the Colts respond? Yes, win and loss at the end of the day is what we're going to discuss on Monday, but the other important topic will be, how did the quarterback that we're asking to make more consistent leaps, especially with short yardage throws, do against a defense that makes your life maddeningly difficult?
I think the thing for Anthony Richardson that is going to be a challenge for the Colts, I'm not saying an incurable challenge, but one of the challenges for Anthony Richardson is the following. It goes without saying, if you are a quarterback in the National Football League, then you have an incredible, obviously, work ethic and everything else. But every quarterback in the National Football League has God-given ability. More often than you're a little bit taller than everybody. You have like an incredible hand-eye coordination. You have great athleticism, etc. Even with that, so most quarterbacks, name a quarterback, Eddie Garrison, top of your head in the NFL right now, starting on Sunday, go boom.
Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers. Jimmy Cook, give me a quarterback starting off top of your head on Sunday, not named Aaron Rodgers, go boom.
Patrick Mahomes.
Patrick Mahomes, that's a shock. Okay, so both of those guys, Patrick Mahomes, right, comes from an athletic family. Dad's a pro athlete. Mm-hmm. There's a God-given ability there. Aaron Rodgers, there's a God-given ability there of, his ability to immediately go through checkdowns and find a slot receiver at the last second and whip it across and he can extend plays, etc. Both of those players are still on a playing field athletically that is inferior to Anthony Richardson. Because the thing about Anthony Richardson that makes him unique coming out, what does everyone say about him? And when I say everyone, I don't mean the guy at Starbucks. I mean NFL general managers, prognosticators, other players, coaches. They all say, no, this guy from an athletic standpoint is basically a break of the mold. So even with the natural athletic ability that Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers, who have incredible work ethics, and I'm not saying Anthony Richardson does not, but even with that, his natural ability is even 2 levels higher. So because of that, one of the real challenges is getting a player who has that kind of ability and has never really had to focus on mechanics because he's 2 steps higher than even the best of the best. Now, and I know people can say, well, it's early in his career. He's really only started, 7 NFL games, and he only started 12 in college, etc. But even still, I hearken back to, I remember when I was in high school, and one time my dad getting on me about one of my classes where I had a bad grade, and I said, Dad, you don't understand. Like, when I get to college, it's going to be totally different. I'm going to be a really good student. I'm going to study. I'm going to work hard. And my dad said, Jake, you don't just flip a switch and all of a sudden habits just are there. That is not to say in any way, shape, or form that Anthony Richardson is lazy. What it's to say is that to this point, he's never had to worry about the footwork and the mechanics that are necessary in the National Football League. And now to have to start learning them, he has to reprogram his brain to actually start thinking through movement that otherwise was totally involuntary and totally not necessary because he was so light years ahead of everybody else athletically and naturally. And that's the challenge. And there are those that will tell you that it's already perhaps too late for him to learn the footwork mechanics and the throwing mechanics to give him the consistency to be the level of consistent passer he needs to be. As we've said before, he does have 3 plays a game where he makes passes that 99% of quarterbacks can't make. And then he has, on 3-yard passes, incompletions that 99% of quarterbacks make. So that's the challenge for the Colts. And we knew this going in. But you have to wonder if privately there's not the concern of, okay, when are we going to start to see? And I know, look, we're 3 games in. I get it, right?
I really didn't think the accuracy would be this bad. You look at every metric with him from a completion standpoint, and Eddie has highlighted, which is fair, there have been some times where it hasn't been his fault. There have been receivers that have dropped passes. There have been the wrong route that was run.
Lead the league in drops,
sure,
I believe.
I'm not fully saying that doesn't deserve some factoring in. And it's only 3 games, which is why I'm waiting to see a larger sample size for him. But I was expecting more of a middle-of-the-pack type of performance from him versus from just an accuracy and completion standpoint versus him being alongside the likes of Drake May, Bryce Young, Deshaun Watson. I expected just a little bit more middle-of-the-pack groundwork, and maybe that's my fault. Maybe the Colts knew it was going to be this much of a struggle, but it goes back to everything we've talked about with him. As long as the numbers continue to trend up and he has a higher floor raised by season's end where you're not seeing all of these valleys in his game, there's going to be reason for optimism going into next season. The other thing for me, and Jake, you brought this up earlier in the week, why did he break the mold? You highlighted it. He's a break-the-mold quarterback because of his athleticism. I know that some fans are hesitant with this because you're worried about him getting hurt, but all we heard in camp was with Anthony Richardson, you don't want to take away what makes him a unicorn. You don't take away the three-pointer from Steph Curry. Maybe, but I just mean his athleticism. That's what makes him unique.
If you're a unicorn and you take away what makes you a unicorn, which is the horn in the middle of your head, are you then a Pegasus?
I think
do unicorns fly? Do we know?
I don't know that they necessarily have, but I don't know they necessarily have wings. Maybe some do. But my point is, what made him special was the athleticism. You like the fact that Lamar Jackson can also throw the ball, but you enjoy when he takes off and goes make big plays with his legs. That's not been there yet this year. Whether on purpose, whether by design, whether he's forcing himself to stay in the pocket or stay more as a passing QB, I don't know. But against Pittsburgh, a defense that's going to force you into uncomfortable positions, I want to see him do more with his legs. Even if it's only 2 or 3 more attempts a game of him either designed run or making something happen, I want to see what makes him special on display more than just, oh, well, he had 10 incompletions, but boy, that 50-yard bomb was crazy.
Hey, Jake, hopefully Anthony Richardson does not break the mold by throwing an errant pass at it. Good point. Eddie, do you have the breaking news sounder by chance? This in just a little bit ago from USAC and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I'll read it directly. Persistent rain and high winds have postponed today's Driven to Save Lives BC 39 presented by Avanti at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. A doubleheader is planned for tomorrow, weather permitting. More updates will be provided at 6 o'clock tonight, Indianapolis time. So for those that were planning on going out to the Speedway, and I was there last night, it was great in terms of getting everything set for the big weekend of racing, and you'll hear me talking about it over the course of the show today. But today's schedule for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has been postponed with plans on that, meaning even more racing, weather permitting, tomorrow.
Can I throw in one other semi-breaking news? We don't need to play the sounder again. This from Kevin Bowen, and this is just his observations. We'll wait for the official practice report. Sorry, what happened?
Nothing.
No, never mind. What happened?
Nothing.
No, forget it.
Eddie was doing backflips a second ago, and then he actually looked like an Anthony Richardson pass. You didn't know where he was going with it before he sent the text saying, by the way, I have the updated availability for practice for breaking news.
That would help if I would...
I sent it just to him because he was on his phone.
Okay, all right. So then I feel somewhat absolved if I didn't get the text message. Eddie, go ahead. What's the breaking news?
I was going to highlight the injury report from yesterday first to connect it to today. So yesterday, Chris Lamons, Kenny Moore, Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis, and Ryan Kelly did not participate. As of right now, it does not look like Kwity Paye, Kenny Moore, Tyquan Lewis, or Ryan Kelly are out at practice. As for Tyquan Lewis, he was a full participant on Wednesday, did not participate yesterday or today, dealing with calf and wrist injuries, so that does not seem likely in terms of his availability for Sunday.
You know, we should probably look also at what Pittsburgh, where they could be banged up, because, you know, one of the areas, fortunately for Pittsburgh, I think, I could be wrong in this, but, you know, obviously the Colts, and I'm curious to see what happens with this, but the Colts showed some improvement in stopping the run against Chicago, but you also were going against a defense that a running game that absolutely, if your defense is struggling, is the one you want to go up against, right? I mean, I think you said it, Jimmy, that the Bears' rushing attack is absolutely the definition of slump buster. But Pittsburgh, you know, that is a team, especially with Fields as well, that you feel like they're going to try to utilize that rush attack and try to gash away at that defensive line. I think we're going to find out whether or not that first start of the year was the anomaly of Gus Bradley's rush defense being so anemic, or whether or not, in fact, there's a real problem that's going to plague them all year long.
Najee Harris was a full participant yesterday, and Eddie had highlighted this earlier in the week, but Jalen Warren, who they kind of use in tandem in different situations in the backfield, he has still not participated for 2 straight days, waiting for today's report, but that with a knee injury. It's been weird, that whole dynamic between Harris and Warren. Najee's still a very talented running back. Both of them are, but it looked like earlier in the week maybe they both might miss, or they both might be in a situation where they would be limited. Now it looks like, at least based on the Steelers injury report, that he'll be good to go. And you know that Fields is able to do it both as a passer and as a runner. If they take Tyquan Lewis off the board, if Eddie's right, and we're still waiting for official confirmation on that, but if they wind up taking him off the board and you're looking at a shredded defensive line at that point outside of Grover Stewart and Leatu Latu. You're looking at a secondary where you're taking away one of their key pieces in Kenny Moore. All of the strength suddenly of that defense, and there weren't a ton to start the year. We knew they were going to win in the trenches. That's what they wanted to do, and they said the secondary would figure the rest of it out. No disrespect to Juju Brents and Julian Blackmon, but it's just the reality of where the rest of those pieces are in the secondary. I thought this was going to be a rock fight. Pittsburgh has the ability to break games open. They did it against LA last week. And the Chargers, while they're not an otherworldly defense, have strong pieces within their trenches and within their secondary. So the idea that Indianapolis is going to be able to stave off Justin Fields, thinking he's the Justin Fields of old, where he's struggling with a porous Chicago offensive line and he's unable to make throws to his receivers, I don't see that as much today. This conversation, I was already leaning Pittsburgh going in, Jake, but everything changes for me a bit if Eddie's observations on the injury report are correct via Kevin Bowen, which means no Kwity Paye, no Tyquan Lewis, no Kenny Moore. That's a recipe for disaster.
It is. It is. Well, here's the thing, though, and I'm going to make you one prediction of certainty, though.
I like it.
We should come up with some sort of a sounder for the Jake Query prediction of certainty. Because every once in a while I make a prediction, and then and you guys laugh at it, and people think I'm crazy, and they go, "This guy's didn't sleep last night," and then it comes true, and people say, "You know what? That guy educates and entertains," and that first part came true, because that, my friends, was a hell of a prediction. I mean, we what was the we have the bad analogy sounder, right, Eddie?
Yeah, from the fish concert.
Yeah, how does the bad analogy sounder go? Just out of curiosity. So when I'm getting ready for one of my bad analogies, like, for example, me comparing the Anthony Richardson's mechanics to my high school algebra prowess, you could use this. That is art right there. That's why people flock from miles around to go see fish. But we need something for the Jake Query prediction of certainty. Every once in a while I make a prediction, and people say to themselves, I got to write that down. I'm going to tell people at the water cooler. I'm going to tell my buddies. If people actually still sat as a family for dinner, they would sit down and they'd say, you know what I heard on the radio today from this guy? And they're going to say, that guy, genius, right?
They always do, don't they? I thought that was just a commonplace on this show. By the way, I'll cue the audio audience in, but the video audience, I maybe they have questions, or maybe I'm going to set myself up for failure like Eddie has before and come off as totally ignorant, not knowing anything. I love a good T-shirt. What is the backstory behind the NYC Pigeon basketball T-shirt? Is that just I explain exactly what it is, or is that a team's logo, or is it just a cool shirt with a pigeon?
I was at I think it's Adidas.
It is an Adidas shirt. Yeah, I like it.
I was at the Adidas store in New York City, and I just thought it was a cool shirt. I'm sure it has some sort of meeting over like street basketball in New York.
Well, sometimes you have like throwback shirts and stuff. So I wasn't sure if maybe it was one of those or not. But I like
saw it in New York City, right. And I used to, before we get to my prediction of certainty, when I lived in New York City as an intern in 1994, one day I was like, you know what? And I played basketball all the time in my college days. And one Saturday I said, you know what? I'm going to go. I lived in the Village, and so I said I'm going to go to West 4th, which is the legendary. They call it now the Cage. West 4th is the big park. It's tiny, actually, but it's fenced in, and it's a little basketball area right in the middle of the Village. And I wanted to partake in legendary New York City street pickup basketball, which are the best. I mean, literally, you see incredible players. You see, but everybody, it's not near the like. There's a lot more camaraderie to it than one would think. So I went to West 4th one day and was like, okay, and I put on probably my Pacers T-shirt or something, and I showed up and I'm all ready to go, and I'm thinking, I'm 21 years old. I'm from Indiana. I've never met a shot I didn't like. I'm used to shooting outside. Let's go. And I walked in, and the place is packed and whatever else, and I line up to get on one of the teams, and we got next, that kind of thing. And I look out, and Anthony Mason's playing. I thought, well, this is different. This is a slightly different thing than playing at the JCC in Indy. And then also Rucker Park is another one that's just legendary. So I kind of fell in love with the New York City street basketball scene, and so when I saw this shirt, I had to get it. Okay, here is my prediction of certainty. Are you ready?
For one, do. You know what to do.
I like that. I do.
The
I really
prediction
like
of
that.
certainty from Jake Query for the Pittsburgh Steelers Indianapolis Colts game that I am 100% confident in. Roof window closed. There we go.
Lock it in.
I mean, we were talking about it, and, the Colts are going to be loud and proud and bang the anvil, but, it reminds me of Millsy and REM, and I saw them in concert once, and the roof was closed, and I just knew it was special, and the wind of change is blowing through like Dylan, but not blowing through Lucas Oil because we're going to close the window.
That was brought to my attention this morning when I was listening to the wake-up call. They brought up the 1, a 2, a you know what to do.
Did they really?
IU thing, because Tom Allen surrendered play calling duties at Penn State because the player couldn't understand what he was saying in the headset. So then they were brought that up.
I can't imagine that at all.
And then I went back and looked. I was like, holy crap, that was a year ago on Tuesday, a.k.a. my birthday. That happened on the 24th.
Tom Allen calling it a play goes like a little bit like this. Okay. Relentless. Be relentless.
I think your voice is still stronger than his. He's very Tom.
My voice is now shot for the rest of the show. Do we have the relentless clip? That the best Tom Allen clip of all time was the relentless speech where he was trying to fire up like his 3-8 Hoosiers before the bowl game, the bucket game, and he's screaming relentless and snapping, and he's running around like maniacally. And
it was something out of an SNL skit,
totally,
legitimately.
because they panned over. The Big Ten Network was in the locker room. They panned over to players that were literally staring at the floor, right? I mean, just like no one was making eye contact, and you could tell it was just a bunch of guys like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? And Tom Allen, nice guy, don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Nice guy, do not get me wrong. Big show lined up today. Kyle and Edwin are going to join us 1:30. A lot of the high school football games, we'll get you up to speed, by the way, as they come along on who may not be playing tonight because of the inclement weather that could be coming through. Kevin Bowen at 2 o'clock today, and it is a feel-good, good for the heart Friday on a story that I saw and then a story that I witnessed in person last night at an event that I was at, and I think is grammatically incorrect, but an event that I attended. But I think people will enjoy it. And I like when I see stories about people overcoming odds, people having an obstacle in their way, and sometimes triumph that you look at and you say, I don't know how I would have reacted in that situation. And you hope that you're never in the situation sometimes that other people face, but then you see the strength, the courage, the perseverance, the belief that they had to get over and through a situation, and you think, if I can only do it with half the level of those things that those folks did, then maybe everything will be okay. And I saw 2 different examples of that this week that I will tell you about coming up in the 2 o'clock hour on this Friday edition of... One more time, Eddie, please. That's okay. Everybody stare at the floor.
I don't understand why they can't understand the play calls. I don't get it.
Can you imagine you're the linebacker with a little thing. You're covering up the ear holes on your helmet, and you're like, okay, guys, it's a critical 4th and 1. Let me see what the coach is calling in. I have no idea what the hell we're supposed to do.
I think there's something wrong with the earpiece. No, that's just Coach Allen. Oh, really? Oh, well.
Right then. Excuse me. Do you have the portal paperwork? We'll come back here on a Friday. It's Query & Company. Now, obviously, it is more severe to the south of us, but every year, and I never know, and I'm very fortunate in this, I realize, but I was at an event last night, and I got done, and it said I had a missed call. First off, I had several missed calls from my mom, and I called her back before the event, and I listened to the voicemail and realized, I think my mom might have actually been erroneously calling me. So I didn't think anything of it when I had a voicemail. I thought it was going to be another 3-minute thing of the audio of Jeopardy at volume 84. And then, maybe my dad in the background, asking if they can change it over to Bonanza or something like that. And instead, it was and I didn't realize this, but apparently I think this is another one of those Jake Query certainties of fact, that people pine for this, it would appear. Because I post it because my mom, it's very important to my mom. My mom is the pride of Shortridge High School. She was a preschool teacher for 40-plus years and still is actively involved at the Children's Corner Preschool. She goes in a couple of days a week and volunteers and helps out and is in Bridge Club, and she's a socialite is what she is. But she also is a very keenly conscientious person for the safety of others. And while she never really opines on this radio show about our sports takes or offers insight or opinions about what's going on with the teams, because she loves all teams and her beloved Chicago Cubs. Yes, my mom's a diehard Cubs fan. But she every year wants me, for you people, for you, not for me, not for Eddie, not for Jimmy, but for those of you in the company. My mom is the official PSA director for Query and Company and offered this last night on my voicemail.
Hi, Jake. This is Mom calling. I was listening to the weather tonight, and there's going to be a lot of wind and a lot of rain in the next couple of days. So we're at that time of year where the wet leaves are a real hazard. So I want your listeners to know that they need to be careful and watch for the wet leaves when they are driving and when they are walking. The leaves and the rain, they're just a toxic mix, and we have to be on top of it. So have a good day. Bye.
Toxic, Jimmy. Now, here's the thing. I noticed this year Mom added walking. We didn't used to have the concern of walking on the wet leaves, but now we've added walking along with driving on the wet leaves.
Why should people that want to use their legs to get about not have to worry?
But let me tell you
safety.
something. Now, next year we're going to add scooters, perhaps. Okay, but
no, you won't allow that. You won't allow the scooters to be involved there. You'd rather them slip into the White
correct.
River.
Well, this is until I'm the mayor, and then the scooters are all going into the White River. We know this already, right? But one thing that I love more than life itself, that my mom calls me with that each year, and I absolutely love the number of people, and I'm not even kidding you, I'm not even being flippant here. I love the number of people that say to me this time of year, I was thinking about your mom when I was driving because it was the leaves were all over the road. Literally every year. My mom's public service announcement, that is the official PSA from the PSA director of Query and Company. So there you go. My mom says be careful of the wet leaves and while driving and walking. And last year there was a lethal mix. Now it's a toxic mix.
How far do we need to go to be able to get Mama Query in partnership with the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration or something? Because that was very PSA high quality level. That belongs in an ad. Well,
that's the other thing that's great is, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that this happens with, and I love it. I absolutely love everything about this. So I hope it never changes. And I am well aware of how incredibly fortunate I am to have both of my parents not only with us but in good health, right? I am. It is not lost on me in any way, shape, or form, and I cherish every one of those. But I also get a kick out of my mom, and my dad does the same thing, via text or phone call when my mom says, "Hi, Jake, it's Mom," as if someone else that sounds like that, whose number listed in my phone is. Now, that leads to this question, Eddie, for you, okay? I've asked this before to other people, but I'm going to ask you. Do you have your parents' phone number in your phone, Eddie?
Yeah.
You have it listed under what?
Mom and Dad.
Okay, thank you. As do I. Mom, Dad, right? Now, not for your folks, but for mine. There are people that I would like to know, do you think more than 50% of people have their parents in their phone as Mom and Dad respectively, or by first and last name?
I'd lean Mom and Dad.
I would think, right? But I'm surprised how many people are like,
or
no,
a variation of that, to like, mommy, like there could be other, like,
that's what I mean. Yes, yes.
some type
Correct.
of, yeah.
At any rate, there you go. Be careful when you're out there. Okay, so the Colts game coming up on Sunday, and then obviously a big slate of college football on Saturday. We'll see what this does in terms of the schedule from a weather standpoint. I mean, it's going to be kind of crazy. There are some big games that could be affected. But one of the things that Jimmy, and I know that this sounds crazy that I bring this up, but we had talked about it earlier and said, you know what, we should mention this, and that is when we have talked so much about Indiana, the reality is there are people here that root for Purdue as well. And let's just be real here. Am I overstating it by saying I am stunned at how so far inept Purdue looks? And I expected them to be more competent at this point.
No,
And they're really bad.
Yeah, I don't think that you're overreaching by any stretch of the imagination. They've struggled on multiple levels, all facets of the game. I'm not even talking about the shellacking that they took at the hands of Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. Oregon State had their way with them. Yes, they have that win over Indiana State, but like that's been their season so far. And it looks like when you're playing competition at your level or even slightly above it, you're going to get wrecked. I don't expect any difference tomorrow against Nebraska with their high-powered offense and how difficult they make things on opposing quarterbacks. And conversely, you wanted better framework and foundation if you were Purdue out of the gate this season, because unlike Indiana, you have heavy hitters across the board on your schedule. You had Notre Dame. You're going to play a ranked Illinois team. You have Oregon on the schedule. You have Penn State. You have Ohio State. Sorry, I forgot
They're going to shock the world against Oregon.
That one.
Yep.
My bad. So that's where they make up some ground. But they have fierce levels of competition here to the point that a slow start, like where's your bar with Ryan Walters before you decide, hey, not only was this season a failure, but this is a fundamental cultural issue with this team.
Jimmy,
it's time for another change.
The frustrating thing for Purdue is this. And I think everybody, I mean, we don't know. It's not like Ryan Walters. We know him personally, right? But by all account, he is a good guy. And I know that it's really early in his tenure. I mean, it's a little ridiculous to start jumping to conclusion this early. But the area where he came in that was going to be his area of expertise is where they struggle. They're really bad defensively. Mm-hmm. They look inept at times. I mean, it goes without saying in the Notre Dame game. But
38 to Oregon State.
Not only that, but they got no pressure.
Yep.
They got beat around the ends. They just looked completely befuddled. And now you go up against Nebraska, then you got to go at Wisconsin and at Illinois, and nobody talks about the fact that Illinois is pretty darn good before you come. And then, yes, you do get a win against Oregon. That's great. But then you go and you got Northwestern, Ohio State, Penn State. I mean,
am I the only one, if this trend continues for them, what I see happening is, regardless of how early it is in the Ryan Walters tenure, when you look at where Indiana is in year one in Kurt Cignetti, it's very hard for me not to compare against similar playing field programs in the Big Ten. If these struggles continue and you're still feeling good about that Oregon win if you're Purdue, when Cignetti drops 45 on you and you get blown out in the old Oakland Bucket game, how do you not make a coaching change? How do you not try to reevaluate where things are?
The one thing that stands out to me with Purdue is, like, with Indiana, they clearly have an identity developing.
Yes.
What's the identity for Purdue?
That is an excellent point.
You're in year number 2. You would think you would have some sort of identity, whether that be a team that scores a lot, a team
was going to be
runs
defensively, right?
Yes. Yeah. But not even that. Like, there's no identity with their defense. Is it an excellent secondary? Is it a stout run defense? Is it a defense that gets after the quarterback? There's none of that.
I mean, I'm curious. If you're a Purdue fan, and here's one of the things to me, we did this during their awesome Final Four run, where I just said, you know what, I'm going to open the phone lines up for Purdue fans to call in and celebrate, because I do understand that if you're a fan of Purdue, you don't get your proper due amongst the Indianapolis media, because so much is talked about with Indiana, and then during football season, you throw Notre Dame into the mix that Purdue doesn't like. So, but then when we broach the Purdue subject, oftentimes Purdue fans are like, yeah, I don't want to discuss it. I'm curious to know because it does feel parasitic. it does feel like I'm like a buzzard or a vulture flying over the carcass when you're only 3 games into year number 2 of a coaching staff and we're starting to publicly question it. Like, is this way too early and are we not giving it time? But in today's world, in today's college football world, Indiana's prime example of this, and for Purdue, it's insult to injury because it's Indiana, right? In today's world, between the transfer portal and NIL and everything else, it should not take the 3-year rebuild. You should be able to do it fairly quickly.
Or at least have some, to Eddie's point, foundation of identity that
Correct.
you can cling to for, hey, they didn't knock it out of the park in the transfer portal, but I see what they're building, and you don't see that right now.
Yeah. Granted, when they beat Oregon on the 16th of October, which that was another, do we have the sounder? Now, can we use this sounder when it comes to making a prediction about Purdue?
I think it's
A
okay.
1, a 2. You know what to do.
I think Purdue fans will allow that. I don't think they have all that many bad
I can't
memories.
remember who won that game.
Akron. It was the Akron game.
No, but
That's when that one happened.
so
Zips.
are we mocking the fact that Indiana went to like 6 overtimes against Akron, who's won 6 games since William McKinley was in office?
And if you remember correctly, there was that IU player in the corner that looked like he hated his life.
Which time?
No, I think that was also the IU player looking in the corner that hated his life. There was one of them during the relentless speech, right?
I didn't see the speech.
The videos when they pan over to the players, it's dead in the eyes, deer in headlights look like what is happening right now.
There is no question. It's actually more often than not what the two of you look like on this program when I start talking, right?
I had somebody, a colleague of ours here, I will not rat out this individual, but they have their parents' name as their parents' names in their phone.
So, like, Jan and Bill.
Yes.
Okay.
And not mom and dad.
Okay.
I do think that if you, like my cousin, for example, works with his dad.
And this person
and
is
so
younger
he calls
than me.
his dad by his first name. What's that?
And this person is younger than me.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And then my only friend Alec chimed in. He said, I have my parents as mom and dad.
Okay. If you work with your parents, I get it. Otherwise, I think most people just go with mom and dad. This is somebody younger than us, though? Wait. How many people in this building are younger than you two?
Whoa. And there's about 4 or 5 year gap between Eddie and I.
This person is younger than you, Eddie?
Yes.
Okay. And it's not an intern?
Correct.
Some pretty slim pickings, right?
Now, I didn't want to rat this person out because this person did not tell me. I had a third party message me about this.
This person what?
Oh, so a third party said, hey.
A third party
I
ratted
see
out
what
this
you're saying.
person.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yes.
So somebody else, how does the other person know about, did they go through their phone?
I don't know. It's an excellent question.
Was it another colleague of ours that told you about this colleague of ours?
No.
This is like a whole different soap opera here. This is awesome. When we come back, by the way, we're going to get you updated on who's in, who's out in terms of events from the sports calendar of this weekend. And then Kyle Nedenrip coming up at the bottom of the hour. A lot of talk about the Colts and the Steelers as well on this Friday edition of Aquarium Company. We need to let you know about from a weather standpoint. This reminds me of back when I was on WIBC and we do school delays and school closings. The BC 39 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway activity for today has been moved to tomorrow, weather permitting, with updates provided tonight at 6 p.m. at ims.com. So there is that. Our pop-up pickleball outing for tomorrow, that's for the station, that was presented by our friends at Franciscan Health at Craig Park in Greenwood, has also been postponed to a yet-to-be-announced future date because of the fact that they didn't think, for the obvious reasons, that some of the courts were going to be dry. There are a few football games statewide. There are a handful that have already been postponed until tomorrow, not many of them within the immediate listening area: Bedford, North Lawrence, Jennings County, Connorsville, North Decatur, Evansville, Harrison, Vincennes, Lincoln, Gibson, Southern, Heritage Hills, Jasper, Evansville Central, Salem, Corydon Central, and Silver Creek, Jeffersonville. But, Jimmy, you mentioned there are a couple in the local area that just recently have been moved,
just
correct?
in the last 15 minutes. Is from Kyle Nettenrip, who I'm sure will update us on all of this when he joins us at the bottom of next hour. Carmel at North Central has been moved from tonight to 11 a.m. on Saturday. Monrovia at Speedway has been moved to Saturday morning at 10. And then Lawrence North at Ben Davis has been moved to 11 a.m. on Saturday.
This is incredible. This is incredible because
at
this
Kyle Nettenrip on Twitter.
This, again, Eddie, do you happen to have the Jake Query lock, the certainty, the prediction of certainty?
A one, a two. You know what to do.
Incredible. I told people on Monday and Wednesday of this week with a guarantee, with a capital G, I guaranteed to two different people earlier this week, I said, and let me say it specifically exactly as I said it. I said, I am here to tell you, as sure as the fact that my name is Jake Query, and as sure of the fact that I do Query and Company on The Fan from noon until 3 each day, I am here to tell you with that level of certainty that you mark it down and mark my words, I guarantee and lock it. I don't pay specific attention to it as much anymore because I did graduate 30-plus years ago and I don't have kids there, but I guarantee you that Carmel will not beat North Central Friday night. I said it like 3 different times. That was the huge rivalry when I was in high school, right? And I said, you mark my words, Carmel will not beat North Central Friday night. And lo and behold,
That's
here we
a
go.
W.
Do we have the
ding?
Yeah, we need the ding
some type
for
of
the
celebratory
Query.
ding.
Yes.
There it is.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much. See, that's what we do on this program, right?
Now, is this why you had the pickleball postponed, Jake? Is because you didn't want to embarrass people out there?
No, listen. Pickleball I enjoy greatly, although here's my thing with pickleball. At my gym, there's a guy that was like, hey, you want to play pickleball? And I said, well, I've never played it before. And he goes, well, here, come out and I'll show you. And it was enjoyable and it was fun, but this guy thought he was Bjorn Borg. And then he was getting really upset with me because I wasn't Rajiv Ram in terms of a doubles partner.
Is that because you kept going into the kitchen?
Correct. It was literally like me after school when I was 15. I couldn't stay out of the kitchen. I just and then I couldn't figure out when you're allowed to go in that kitchen and when you have to stay out of. So that part of it, the instinct of where you're allowed to be and when you're allowed to be there, was confusing to me. But the game itself was super fun, and it's going to be fun when we do the pop-up pickleball challenge because people will also get a chance to learn the game, and that's part of the fun of it. And it is. I have said in Milwaukee, when Shannon and I go to Milwaukee every year, there is one store that I go into downtown. In Milwaukee's, it is basically Milwaukee's Circle Center Mall. They had I can't remember the name of what they called it, but Milwaukee had a downtown mall, just like Circle Center Mall, that is now predominantly residential housing. But one of the areas of that mall is indoor pickleball courts. And I've said forever, if you were a young person that moved to a new city, you got a job transfer, you moved to a city and you don't know anybody, it's the perfect way to meet people because, people are out there and you're pairing up for different teams and doing whatever else, and it's all ages. And, I mean, it's a great social event, and it is fun, and it's a pretty decent workout as well. Speaking of workouts, the Colts are doing exactly that, and we're going to get deeper into who's in, who's out as they get set for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's next. mention, I don't think, and I felt really bad. I did watch the end of the announcement of America's Got Talent when Richard Goodall of Terre Haute won this season. You watched it, right, Eddie?
I did.
And I was elated for him, but at the same time, I felt terrible because he beat the girl that had the routine with the dog. And the dog was, I mean, it truly was remarkable, the stuff that her dog was trained to do. But I felt terrible because she's up there on the stage with this dog, and they announced that Richard Goodall wins, and, like, the confetti comes, and the crowd goes crazy, and Heidi Klum comes up and is hugging him, and the girl with the dog just has to keep standing there, which that alone is awkward enough, but she's standing there holding, like, a 40-pound dog. And she just had to keep – did you notice that? She just stood there. You could tell she was like, what are we supposed to do here,
I was
right?
more concerned about the well-being of the dog.
No question.
With all that confetti going
on.
The
dog was unbelievable because, like, literally it was completely unflappable. Like, while the crowd was going crazy, the dog's just like, yeah, okay, whatever. Very, but anyway, very cool that he won. All right, so Colts and Steelers coming up Sunday, Lucas Oil Stadium. One thing, by the way, to, again, update on, we have the Urban One radio stations have had a tailgate just across from the N.K. Hurst Beanfield. That is postponed. We'll have another one before the game against Miami, I think, is the next home game.
The party on McCarty?
That's right, the party on McCarty. So there is that. But I'm telling you right now, I don't know if it's officially been announced, but roof window closed on Sunday.
Disappointing.
I'm just telling you,
The coin did not favor us.
That's right. In terms of the Colts, they are on the practice field right now. Kevin Bowen going to join us just about an hour from now.
So you're saying there's a rain bubble over Salina?
Salina. There's a rain bubble from Salina to here. Although, matter of fact, Missouri, one blob. Right?
I was just making sure that we were on the same page.
Yes. 2% chance of rain in Salina, Kansas, which means that you have to close the roof. It's absolutely locked up. Okay, for the Colts themselves, please give me their injury report and what they have thus far, Eddie, for today.
So it was reported earlier today that Kwity Paye was not out at practice along with Kenny Moore, Tyquan Lewis, Ryan Kelly. This would be back-to-back days for Kelly with a neck injury, and Tyquan Lewis, Kenny Moore, and Kwity Paye have yet to practice this week. So I would highly doubt that those two are suiting up on Sunday.
And, for the Steelers, the only real significant injury, I guess you'd say, that you're looking at on their injury report, running back Jalen Warren, who's kind of a backup for them, did not practice this week so far, at least as of Wednesday, because of a knee injury. Now, Najee Harris didn't practice, but that was a rest injury, so that was a scheduled day off for him. Same with T.J. Watt. Didn't practice earlier this week, but he was limited, but that also was a rest situation. Russell Wilson limited with a calf injury, but that doesn't matter because he's not going to be the guy starting anyway. I think a lot of people thought, Jimmy, when Russell Wilson was acquired, originally they thought that's who Pittsburgh was handing the keys over to. And yet, give them credit and give Mike Tomlin credit. Justin Fields outplayed him, and here we are, right?
They still won't formally name him the starter, though, which is just weird to me. Like,
gamesmanship, Jimmy.
But is it? Because Wilson's not healthy right now. Like, he's still on the injury report every week. But I do love that you and I, a peek behind the curtain, Eddie and I love coach speak and gamesmanship and the fake chess matches that happen in press conferences. So that does make me chuckle. Like, Fields has played exceptionally well for them. Like, he has not cost them games. He has been sharp, especially when they need to close out games. I'm not putting him up there in the upper quartile of quarterbacks in the National Football League.
It's in the upper quartile of upper quartiles.
But
that's rare air.
But he's been sharp, and that's what Pittsburgh has really longed for post Big Ben, is something that is consistent for them at the quarterback position. So while it has no impact or bearing on the game itself, it is odd to me with how well Justin Fields has played, and it's kind of had a breath of fresh air for the Steelers offensively. They would not just go ahead and name him the starter, because I felt like, A, Fields outplayed Russell Wilson throughout the offseason, and B, I think Russell Wilson's washed. I think you've seen what he is. You saw enough in Denver.
All things given equal, if with those two guys, all things given equal, you would go with Fields because he's younger, and therefore you still can potentially go up with it. Whereas Wilson, you know that there's probably no more, whatever level he's playing at, that's probably the peak level.
And it's not like he's
right?
the veteran that's going to keep you in games. He turned the ball over just at exceptionally high levels as a Denver Bronco. Like, he was actively costing them games. So I know that's kind of semantics, but if I was Justin Fields, if I was a Steelers fan, I would like that to finally be clarified that he is the starter moving forward, because ordinarily, in years past, you would look at Pittsburgh and say, solid running game, their quarterbacks don't scare you, but boy, is that defense good. And now it is still, that defense is good, solid running game, but man, Justin Fields adds a dynamic to that offense to where if the Colts injury report trends where it is, this could be one that gets ugly. Like, I know we make our official predictions at the end of the show. I lean Steelers as it is. I think Pittsburgh wins this game. I think defensively, it's too tough of a test for Anthony Richardson to where his flaws are once again exposed, and the Colts at that point drop to 1-3. But the confidence level I have in that selection goes tenfold if the injuries on the defensive end the Colts are expecting come true, because at that point, where are you getting after Fields? Where are you making his life difficult? At that point, all you really have to focus on in terms of true game wrecksmanship on the line is Latu. Like, Lewis is a good player. Stewart's a good player. They're not the same level as DeForest Buckner or the same level of assignment to watch out for as Kwity Paye. When you add him in, you start to slice down the Colts in the trenches. If it's just one guy to worry about, I think Fields picks you apart.
By the way, you mentioned Ben Roethlisberger.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible that I've just slept through this. Ben Roethlisberger retired, 2 seasons ago?
I think it's been more than that. 3 or 4.
Let's see, they went, yeah, you're right, because they went from a quarterbacking standpoint. I mean, they had Kenny Pickett in his little hands. They went with Pickett for a year or 2, right?
I almost sent you a video of Chance.
Did they had Mason Plumlee for maybe a year? So is this year 3?
Mason Rudolph.
What'd I say?
Plumlee. It's okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
it's
Mason Rudolph. Yeah.
He's offended wherever he is. By the way, I almost sent you a picture of Chance after he was born with little hands. I thought you might appreciate that.
He already has half the size of the hands of Kenny Pickett.
2021 is when Ben Roethlisberger hung up.
Okay, so then Rudolph was that first year, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
They went back to him, I think, and then, but at any rate,
it's been a slug for them to find the next answer at QB.
But here's my question. And maybe I've just slept through this, and maybe the answer is as obvious as the difference between Mason Rudolph and Mason Plumlee. But have we heard from, where has Ben Roethlisberger? For a guy that was like a mainstay, a multiple Super Bowl winning and potential Hall of Fame level quarterback, what is it like? I've not heard from him. Am I off base here? And the fact that it's usually guys, you still see them in some commercials, or they do a little studio time here, or they, I don't know, they're on the Manning cast, or they're having fun with this or that. Have we seen from him anywhere?
He used to have a podcast, and he hasn't. I don't know if he still does. He does still do it, yeah.
Okay.
Footballing with Ben Roethlisberger.
And he lives where? In Pittsburgh?
I would assume so. I don't know.
I don't know what made me think of that. I'm just saying, all of a sudden it was just man, for a guy that, a really good player, and I know he had some controversies, but no doubt a very good player, right?
Why did they go BAHL with that? And he on the podcast, it's
no idea.
Footballin', as Eddie emphasized there with Ben.
I would imagine, too, number one, because his name begins with BE, and number two, because isn't that a Pittsburgh, linguistic thing?
I mean, that very well could be.
That's how
that would
how
make
they talk
sense if that is the way of the accent.
Yes,
in
people in Pittsburgh are very proud of the odd linguistics of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a cool city, by the way. Very cool city. But in terms of the Colts, I think if I'm Gus Bradley, I get aggressive in this game because there's been talk about whether or not the Colts defense is, obviously they gave up, 65 yards on the ground to Chicago, and we can celebrate that. But Chicago, as I mentioned, is an inept offensive team.
Yeah, you and I said this earlier this week. I watched that entire game. I watched that entire game the Colts did defensively against the Bears because while Caleb Williams looks promising, and they had some bright spots, that offensive line is a train wreck. There's no running game. There's no real threat to this point. Rome Odunze's not taken the rookie leap yet. that's not who they are. That's an anomaly game until they show, to your point, Jake, until they show they can do it on a consistent basis.
Right. Now,
but I'm all for the pressure.
Listen, and I think Justin Fields is a good player. I do. I thought he was a really good player coming out of Ohio State. I thought he was I think he has a better arm than he's given credit. But he is still a young player, relatively speaking. And in addition to that, if I'm Gus Bradley, I get defensively aggressive. And I go at times 5 up front, and I blitz, and I send guys, and I bring the heat. Twofold. Number one, because it sends a message to Pittsburgh, and it gets Justin Fields perhaps a little, doesn't allow him to get into rhythm. But more importantly, I think it sends a message for Indianapolis. I think that schematically, what the Colts need to come up with against the Chicago Bears is less about trying to send a message to the Bears and more about trying to determine and develop exactly who they are themselves, right? And so even with some of the rotation you're going to have to do due to those players that we may or may not see on Sunday, I think I think the time is now to turn up the wick on that. Now, having said that, we do know there are a couple that did not practice today, correct, Jimmy? Now, we have more update on that?
Yeah. Eddie, do you want to make the official announcement? This from Shane Steichen a little bit ago.
Shane Steichen has ruled out Kwity Paye with a quad injury and Kenny Moore with a hip injury.
Kenny Moore one's big, right? Because so let's go back to this. The defensive backfield, when Chris Ballard, when the roster was set, and Chris Ballard was criticized for, what's that?
Flat brim hat.
That's right.
Can't forget he was wearing that.
Is he going bald? Did somebody tell me that's why he's wearing that?
It could be. I mean, I feel like he always reps that hat, so it's hard for me to distinguish if there's something.
I mean, I'm cool with that.
Deeper
I get
going
it,
on.
right? I'm a little. Which, by the way, can you guys see here? What do you think? What do you think?
I think you're all right.
Eddie?
You're fine.
Top of the dome, is it looking
fine
a little
now.
thin?
Just thinning, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out on the top of my dome if roof's open or closed.
It's starting to open.
Do you also flip a coin every day?
I do. But I think once you hit 52, I think you're starting to get out of the woods on that. But regardless, so Chris Ballard, when the roster was set and Chris Ballard met with the media and was answering questions, and I kind of get this. I do. I get that if you're Ballard, you're it would get really old to constantly be questioned of every single decision you make. But that's why you get paid a lot of money, right? And when it came to, and you've heard me talk a lot about it, when it came to the defensive backfield, the whole thing was, listen, these guys got to play. I mean, I've got to find out in order to become players, they got to play. And it doesn't do me any good to go out and get a bunch of veteran free agents and sign them to plug holes. I've got to see what I have here. And I get it. I don't know that it was the quality of player that people were upset about as much as the lack of depth at the position. And when you look at that unit, that room, the defensive backfield room, already how many of them have been dinged up in some way, shape, or form? A lot, right? Juju Brents, Kenny Moore. You had Nick Cross, and who I think has actually played pretty well, but through the camp, I think Nick Cross was dinged up. I think Jalen Jones has played well, but you don't have a lot of depth now. At your nickel, for example, Kenny Moore goes out, and he's being now replaced by a guy who also himself this week was on the injury report. I mean, they are really thin at that position, and I don't know that it's even so much. Dallas Flowers has been dinged up.
Yeah.
It's not so much that people have an issue with the lack of overall skill at that position as much as just the lack of numbers, the lack of bodies, right? Because everybody was saying, everybody to a man, my mom called me, and when she wasn't calling me about wet leaves, she said, hi, Jake, it's Mom. Cornerbacks are like sunglasses. You can never have enough because when you find them and they're broken. It's true. Cell phone chargers and sunglasses. I will always say that. They just didn't have enough bodies. Jimmy, they're starting to see it already, right? The attrition of it, and we're a quarter of the way through, is already starting to pile up.
And
right?
admittedly, some of my issue was the inexperience. maybe not fully the quality of the cornerbacks in that room, but once you got past the likes of Kenny Moore and Juju Brents, who obviously are both out now, Juju Brents having already been on IR and then Kenny Moore being declared out this weekend, now you are relying on what you told the media was a young, hungry group, a bunch of dogs there that were going to go and impress and take the noise and use it as chip on your shoulder motivation and not be a weakness. Well, now you kind of asked what you maybe weren't wishing for this early in the season. Now you have it on display on Sunday, because the key to help your secondary, which was your trench warfare, that's pretty much gone unless Leatu Latu is able to, channels inner Dwight Freeney again and be as impactful as he was at times against the Bears. But they're going to be able to now key on him because you take Kwity Paye off the board. You already had DeForest Buckner off the board. I think that gets a little bit easier for what the Steelers want to do from a protection standpoint. That now opens up exposure for your secondary where there's not depth. It's a bunch of younger players. There's not that full-scale veteran leadership that a Kenny Moore brings. And my biggest issue with it, Jake, is not that Chris Ballard maybe aired as much as it is the level of arrogance that he once again put forward, like, oh, this secondary's fine. We've brought enough in. We have guys there. Okay, well, you're going to get, albeit a one-game sample size, a pretty clear picture of where this group is on Sunday, because now you've tied a hand behind Gus Bradley's back defensively without the major pieces up front and by taking away the thin veteran areas you had in the secondary. Like, you're going to get an opportunity to prove you right or wrong against Pittsburgh here in 2 days.
Here's the thing. You know what Pittsburgh has not done this year? Very often.
What's that?
Throwing the ball.
Correct, but more so, part of their recipe. And the Colts have done a decent job at this, but they've got to be aggressive at it if you want to try to beat Pittsburgh. The Steelers so far this year, Uno. Did you guys ever play the card game Uno?
Oh, yeah.
Love Uno.
Uno's a fun game, right?
It's classic.
How many languages can you say the word one? Right?
Nice.
Uno? One, that's three.
Sure.
Any others, Eddie? Any language you want to throw in?
No.
Okay, so I'm trilingual on the number one. That's the number of times the Pittsburgh Steelers have turned the ball over this year. They have 2 fumbles. They recovered both. They have 1 interception. Now, I'm not counting turnover on downs. I'm talking about actual giveaways in terms of, like, losing possession of the football. But that's been part of their recipe. And I think the Colts have to get instead of sitting back and saying, we'll just force them to turn over on downs, I think you've got to get after it and get them away from that. Because when teams, that is, they're eking out. I don't mean that to be disrespectful towards what they've done, because they're obvious, and that's kind of the case of, if you look at it like just Mike Tomlin teams, right, is they don't typically make huge mistakes. But if you look at it, I mean, an 8-point win over Atlanta, a touchdown, a 1-possession win over Denver, and then a win over the Chargers when Justin Herbert was banged up. A win is a win. Don't get me wrong. A win is a win. But it doesn't feel it feels like you are within striking distance, but they're winning those games because I don't know what their time of possession is, but based on the fact that they're not surrendering possessions, I'm guessing it's in their favor. Partially because they can go on the ground. And they can use Fields a little bit on the ground if they need to, probably. I don't know how often they run designed plays for him.
28 carries on the season, 6 carries last week. To Eddie's point about them not throwing the ball a ton with Fields, that was the case the first 2 games, and they kind of opened things up for them in what was a back-and-forth second half against the Chargers. He winds up dropping back 32 times, completes 78% of the passes, and accuracy has not been an issue for Fields so far as the 3 starts, whereas with Anthony Richardson, we talk about the small sample size and his pass attempts, only 20 or so pass attempts a game. Fields is on that same trajectory, but he's being efficient with the football. And to that end, Jake, he's not costing them games. So there's a lot of different ways Pittsburgh could decide to attack Indianapolis, but if they're going to drop back heavily with Fields, I'm with you. I think that if you're Gus Bradley, you make up for the areas of weakness going into week 4, and you bring pressure at a constant basis and make life a living hell for Fields.
Do you think there are going to be any high school football games tonight?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah. It's just rain and wind.
But it's really windy.
We'll see.
What about lightning?
We'll see about the games, or we'll see if it's really windy.
Yes.
Isn't lightning usually a bit of an issue? Are we getting lightning
From
with
what
this
I
weather?
understand, it's not supposed to be a ton of lightning. It's just supposed to be, as Eddie mentioned, like monsoon-like conditions potentially.
By the way, Jake, I know we've got like 90 seconds here. Did you see the news from earlier that Michael Andretti is relinquishing his ownership stake in Andretti Global?
I did. As a matter of fact, I reached out to Michael Andretti to try to get him on the program. I don't anticipate that will come to fruition. But this has been – Andretti Global has tried for a long time to – the reason they rebranded from Andretti Autosport to Andretti Global is because Michael Andretti's team, which is involved in motorsports in a variety of different ways. He owns teams in basically every form of motorsport in North America that you can think of, except for NASCAR, obviously, but from an open-wheel standpoint, and is extremely involved in the development of drivers. He is a huge part of the Indy Next Series, and, of course, IndyCar. You know, they have their hands in a lot of different places. And they rebranded from Andretti Autosport to Andretti Global, I think with the intention, because they have Michael and his father Mario have very actively tried to get involved with a Formula One team. And as we've talked about with Mario on this program, they just don't know what the holdup is on why Formula One has such a pushback about granting that to Andretti Autosport. But Michael, who will still be involved with the team, will go more towards a step-back strategic role, and he has sold a percentage of his shares, according to numerous reports, to the ownership group of Gamebridge and the 1001 Group, which owns Gamebridge Fieldhouse and is also the title sponsor of the Indianapolis 500-mile race. So if that, I would imagine that part of that is because of Michael Andretti's frustration with not getting the licensing into Formula One. But either way, and I'm not saying this to carry water, I think those who are involved in motorsport would tell you that Michael Andretti's involvement, not just in the IndyCar series, but in the development series and the support series that go into the road to Indy, he has been a critical piece. His team still will be, but he is absolutely to be thanked for selfless time, promotion, and finances that have gone into all of those areas. But we'll find out more as time goes on as to the reasoning for the decision to, at least according to reports, back away from his ownership. We shall see, right? So that is an interesting story from today. Kyle Neddenrup going to join us, going to do it on the other side. We'll get you caught up on not only what are the games of the night in high school football, but what games also are going to be the games of tomorrow. That conversation next. Auto guest line. Kyle, of course, from the Indianapolis Star, joins us each Friday to preview a couple of high school football games. And there are a couple of big ones on the slate. But, Kyle, let's begin with this. I would anticipate that we already have some that have been moved to tomorrow, and we may continue to see that over the course of the day today. So far, the games we know that will be played tomorrow as opposed to today include which?
Yeah, they're coming hot and heavy right now, and I just found out Warren Pike is canceled or postponed till 10 a.m. tomorrow, so that's kind of the latest one that I heard. Also, Lawrence Central at Center Grove is noon tomorrow. Lawrence North at Ben Davis is 11 a.m. tomorrow. Monrovia Speedway is 10 a.m. tomorrow. North Putnam Cascade, which is 2 5-0 teams, they're TBD on the time, but they're playing tomorrow. Tri-West Lebanon is noon tomorrow. Let's see, Southport is going to Bloomington South tomorrow at 10 a.m. And Carmel North Central is 11 a.m. tomorrow. And then there's several. Edinburgh, Switzerland County, 6 p.m. tomorrow. I think that's it for our area as of now. Indian Creek also, they're postponed to tomorrow at Edgewood. That's pending time still as well. I think that is probably close to all for right now, but I think there's more coming from what I've heard, and some that are planning on playing. Like I know Roncalli Brebeuf, they're trying to get their game in. Brownsburg Westfield planning on it. Greenfield Central New Pal, but it's all subject to change, based on the next few hours.
Kyle, when you say trying to get those games in, I mean everybody's fighting the same conditions to some extent. Is it more just varying field conditions and varying setups there for why some schools and matchups feel more optimism to be able to get it in than others?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same weather, right? So it's basically based on what you feel like is possible compared to, just trying to do it tomorrow. And some of it's honestly, it's kind of like the Lightning things that some games weren't able to be played Saturday because of referees, because of, other things going on at the school. There's a ton of homecomings tonight, which is also added another element of like, what are we going to do with our homecoming festivities? Parades have been canceled. All kinds of things go into this that probably a lot of us don't think about or, don't have to worry about. But it's just a lot of things like that. And I think it's less the field. I think the wind is like the biggest thing. Like you don't want to, force anything and then have a wind issue that causes, problems that are really bad. So, I think that's the thing is, and they're all the superintendents and people making decisions are all looking at the same weather. It's just like a managing of like, do we think we can do this or not? And a lot of them are going the other direction and thinking they'll play tomorrow as of right now. But I think some are still going to try to play. Yeah.
Tomorrow, maybe it's going to be, now. I mean, the rain is supposed to be there tomorrow, but maybe the wind dies down. You know what I mean? Like maybe because we've always known of wet conditions in football and sloppy games, but maybe it's not as windy. I don't know if that's part of the thought process. Yeah. But let me ask you this, Kyle. You've been around it. I mean, you were in year number what of covering high school football in Indiana?
I think 17.
Okay. So in that 17 years, I'm curious of this. This is, and I know today the clouds are moving fast enough, it's hard for me to yell at them, but I'm going to do that. When did homecomings become HOCO? When did this become a thing? I see now all the kids, like all my friends who have kids in high school, they're posting like these elaborate invites to HOCO. When did it become? Are we too lazy to just say homecoming?
I'm too old to even know that's the thing that happened.
Did you guys, either one of you guys know that?
HOCO was a thing when I was in school in 2013.
Homecoming for me.
Not as prevalent as, like, I think it's more prevalent now, but that was a vernacular that I was familiar with.
Okay, what about this? And this is another thing, old guy yelling at clouds. When did it become hip, and how long is it going to be hip for kids to HOCO at the dance along with their, whether it be a formal suit or for, a dress, to then wear like Nikes with it?
It's a good question. I can't date that one.
Have you noticed it?
I have seen that, but I always wore dress
Kyle,
shoes.
you notice that? You notice that like Nikes are worn with everything now? The Air Max?
I'm not against that. As someone who doesn't like to dress up either, I guess. So I can get down with that. But yeah, I don't know the whole HOCO thing. I'm so out of it. I'm not even aware of that. And I cover high school sports, so that maybe is something I should know.
They charge by the letter, Jake. You know that.
That's
So you
gotta be it, right?
you got to cut costs for.
Hey, Kyle. So let's just assume that the game, that it's a full slate of games here, whether it be today or tomorrow, whatever it might be. The two that are most intriguing to you, or the two that could have the best implication, maybe as kind of a separation weekend, would be which?
Well, here's kind of a fun game. Maybe I'll get to cover two games instead of, because I am interested in, if let's say Brownsburg West, as of right now, I'm definitely curious to see how that one shakes out tonight. So I'm assuming they'll play that game and I can cover that game. Then I would be really interested to go over to Lawrence North Bend Davis tomorrow. They play at 11, I believe, 11. So, I mean, that's going to be a really interesting game, I think, because, BD's 1-4, but defending champs, LN 5-0. This is their first, biggest. So I think that one's interesting. But from a standpoint, if we had a full slate, I mean, the other game tonight that's really interesting, I think, is Greenfield Central at New Pal, which as of now is still, as I'm aware, on the schedule, 5-0 at 4-0. And Greenfield came really close last year. They were within a touchdown of New Pal and then lost pretty handily in the sectional game. But honestly too, tonight, if teams do play, the passing, I wonder about how many passes are you going to throw tonight? And I know Greenfield, they love to throw, they have a really good quarterback, which is why they love to throw. They can also run, but how much does that kind of factor in also to game plans? And honestly, I talked to John Hart from Brownsburg yesterday for a story or for an interview, and just they kind of had a plan, kind of knowing this could happen. You kind of have to game plan for if it is super windy, like it's going to be tonight. So I'm sure a lot of teams are in that boat where they you have to put in a different game plan because you're going to have to run a little bit more than usual. But yeah, I would say that's the other one. Then Whiteland Martinsville is also a really good game tonight that currently is still on the schedule. So there's three. But yeah, if I was to see another one tomorrow, that I think that Ellen Bryn Davis game could be really interesting too.
Kyle Netrump is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, the master of all things high school sports over at the Indy Star, updating us on everything with the weather conditions being what they are on a Friday night in high school football. Kyle, this feels like, and you would know better than I, because I'm, really only focused on the assignments that I have within the high school ranks, but this feels like the most impacted a season has been in a minute in terms of multiple teams being impacted by weather. And I get it. We live in a state where, because of the format of the postseason, everybody gets an opportunity, everybody gets a ticket to the dance. So it's not fully impactful, but I imagine it's somewhat frustrating for these teams and coaches to have as many bumps in the scheduling road of having to change and modify things and get out of routine. They're at the mercy of Mother Nature, but I imagine that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, it is. And I always say, it seems to me like every other year, like the weather it's either like perfect for a year and then the next year it's like this. But I don't remember, it seems like this year we've had more postpone, not counting the COVID situation, obviously, but just from a weather standpoint, we've just had more weirdness as far as rescheduling games, and there's always been some of that. It seems like every 5 or 6 years, maybe you have one night of that or whatever. But we've had already 2 nights of, lightning delays and even postponed till the next day, and then tonight is just another one where it's just some weirdness. And really, the weather hasn't been bad other than these Friday nights, so it's just kind of strange how it's worked out that way. But yeah, I mean, standpoint of everything gears up to get ready for Friday, and then you have to reschedule. And honestly, there's a lot that goes into, if teams come, they have to get these kids back on the buses, Saturday morning to make another trip. And it's harder than, especially for a football team where it's a lot of numbers and, cheerleaders going, and it's just a bigger thing than like a basketball team would be. So there's a lot of parts to this that go on behind the scenes, and so it's just, it's frustrating that it's worked out this way, and honestly, football is a big moneymaker. As far as getting crowds, you would have had some huge crowds tonight with all these homecoming or HOCO games as it is.
There you go. There you go.
And,
well done. Yep.
So,
That's right.
but yeah, it's too bad. I mean, it's just nothing you can do about it. Nobody's fault. Just kind of a weirdness to this season so far.
Do you think our numbers go up, Jake, every time we use the phrase HOCO, especially with the youth?
I mean, we're
the
very
kids
hip.
have to be.
We're
Yeah,
very
right?
hip. Listen, we did market research on this, and kids love it. I mean, they absolutely love it. Kyle, lastly, Shortridge, the Blue Devils, baby. How are we looking here?
Well, lost a tough one last week in overtime to Washington. So that was a tough one. Then they're off this week, and then back at it next week. And I was trying to remember who they have. They play Addicts next week, so that'll be a tough one too. But yeah, sitting at 1-4 right now. Lost a couple close ones.
Now, Addicts is not playing home games at Addicts. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, they're playing at Arlington for their home games, but they just announced a
I know
couple
they're-
weeks ago.
Go ahead.
That they're going to get a new stadium built there finally. So not a new, basically totally refurbished stadium.
Right.
So it'll be nice over there in a couple of years, but definitely due for that.
Kyle Neddenrip, Indianapolis Star, for whichever games you do end up covering tonight. I know that you said Brownsburg-Westfield is the intention. We'll see if that gets underway, but we will be following along, especially on your X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, account, and at IndyStar.com to find out which games are in and out for today and tomorrow. And then look forward to talking to you next week. Have a good weekend, all right?
Appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Kyle Neddenrip joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Now, by the way, he mentioned Addicts and getting a new field. I've always thought two of the coolest football venues. You've been to a lot of them, Jimmy. Best football venues in the area.
I love seeing a game at Carmel. I love getting an opportunity to go to Bluff, where I'm going tonight. Those are two of my favorites off the top.
I love, and I don't know,
Mount Vernon's always great.
Tech, like the like old bowl
with
of
the
Tech.
concrete bleach. Yeah,
Totally,
yeah.
right?
It's hard to get better.
And then Howe, I don't know if Howe is still playing, but Howe is also kind of like in a bowl like that. Loved it. So hopefully Addicts is able to put together something. I love those, just like the historic nature of it, right?
Eddie, any from you? Any venues off the top?
I like the new stadium at Noblesville. That's really nice. And then Center Grove, obviously, they have
Franklin
an electric.
Central's was really nice, right?
Oh, yes. It's very weird, though, for Franklin Central, because they have the track and then it's just like a straight-up wall for fans. It's very odd.
Now, North Central just redid one. I haven't been there yet. But
that is very nice, too. Very nice. I was there last year when it opened.
My name's in a brick there, Eddie. Just so
is there?
Uh-huh. Yeah, you could find it. I haven't found it yet.
I'll find it, and then I'll throw it at your car.
You would not be the first, probably, that would want to do that. Speaking of, like, a brick from a venue like that, I saw something yesterday in Major League Baseball, and it made me think, what would I want from this if it were an Indianapolis team? Because fans were getting something very cool, and I thought, what would you want if that were to happen here in Central Indiana? I'll explain what I'm talking about and opine with you guys on what would be the coolest keepsakes of Indianapolis sports on the other side. Then Kevin Bowen going to join us 2 o'clock hour, and it's a Good for the Heart, Feel Good Friday. That story coming up in 45. Okay, so I realize this is not a local sports story, but it made me think. I've told the story before of when a couple of years ago for an IndyCar event, we had some downtime, so I took the ferry from Larkspur. We were up in Sonoma, and I went into San Francisco and then took the train from San Francisco over to Oakland and went to an A's game with Henry Woodford, our buddy that was formerly at Channel 13, lives in the Bay Area. Went to an Oakland A's game at Oakland Coliseum, and it was pretty fun, actually. Old cookie-cutter stadium, for sure. There's not a whole lot of character about it, but it's old and it's historic, and there's been a lot of great baseball and a lot of great moments that have taken place in that stadium. And the A's now, of course, are leaving, and that's a whole different talk show. But I thought it was cool during the game that fans were taking either souvenir cups or bottles of water and handing them over to players in the bullpen that were then using a shovel to shovel some of the dirt from the playing surface into the bottles for fans to be able to take home as a keepsake from Oakland Coliseum, which is not defunct now. It's going to be used for other venues, but not for baseball. And it got me thinking, in Indianapolis, if there was something that you were able to, if that was happening where they were permanently leaving one of the venues here and you had the opportunity, or Central Indiana, I mean, you can include Bloomington, Lafayette, whatever it might be, and you were able to take, now, I think people know I have a piece of the Astrodome at home. I have the sign, the original men's restroom sign from the Speedway at home. The Speedway is aware, by the way, so nobody come after me. And one of the coolest things, I think, there's a store on Mass Ave. Have you ever been to Silver in the City, Jimmy? It's like a gift store.
Yes.
I would assume they still have these. One of my favorite possessions is I have a duffel bag that is made from the Teflon of the RCA Dome. I have a wallet as well made from the Teflon of the RCA Dome. And those are probably two of my favorite possessions, to be honest with you, because it's just super cool. One of my dreams was to be able to go up on top of the RCA Dome roof and bounce around like a trampoline. And Ed Sorensen did a sportscast where they allowed him to do that. And then he thought it'd be fun to slide down it, and he basically shish kebabbed himself on one of the lightning rods that was there. And it was not pretty. But he was bouncing around, and I was off that day, and so I can't remember, for whatever reason, I couldn't go with him up to the top of the dome and do that. But what would it be for you? If the thing that I've always wanted, I'll pay right now, I'm just going to put this into the stratosphere. I'll pay top dollar for this. And I would imagine, one would think that maybe Shannon could get this for me. I don't know. But in the old days of Market Square Arena, all of the chairs that was the bench had leather coverings that went over the headrest of part of it that was just white leather with the Market Square Arena logo on it. I would pay top dollar for just one of the chair coverings that says Market Square Arena. Anything from Market Square Arena, I'd pay top dollar for. But for you, Jimmy, you would go with what?
So there's been times over the last 10 or 15 years that I've had the money to do it, but where renovations or full teardowns have happened to stadiums I really appreciate or love. If I could have had, when they did the big seat cleanup at Arrowhead Stadium, one of the seats that they have there, because they did a big renovation in the last couple of years, that would be cool. Anything from old Yankee Stadium before they moved to the new park in 2009 would be neat. And then getting an opportunity to go to Butler games with my dad was really special. And they did those remodels, and we never jumped in to try to do it. But if we could have a memento of some kind from the area
Old
of
Hinkle
where we sat, would have been pretty neat.
Eddie?
Did you say local, Jake? Engel here?
Yeah, I guess so, but yeah. Same thing, though.
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that too much. Probably a brick from IMS, if they ever left there, right? The start-finish line?
Well, the bricks that are available, true story, the bricks that are available now that people have been able to get from the Speedway is when they would do the tunnels. There are 14 tunnels that go into the Speedway, and when they would do it and they take up part of the track, for years in the 70s, they would do it. When they would do that, the bricks were just sitting underneath the stands, and then people figured it out and started accumulating them. Now, the start-finish line bricks, they rotate through. They have some of them in storage. They're all original, but they rotate those through over time. In the luckiest moment of my life, and I've had a lot of very lucky moments, I had somebody in from out of town. I was touring them through the Speedway and went down to the bricks in October. This was probably 18 years ago. And when I walked down there to the start-finish line, giving somebody a tour. It just so happened to be a day that they were resetting new bricks along the start-finish line.
Wow.
And so they were taking up the start-finish line bricks and turn around and like, here, you want one?
That's really neat.
That's what you call right place, right time. Kevin Bowen, wrong place, right time. At least it's the right time for us in the right place, but for him, he probably thinks wrong because he's going to join us next, talking Colts and what took place for practice today, getting set for the Steelers. That conversation, other side. 2 o'clock hour underway on a Friday, a Colts Blue Friday. JMV, by the way, going to be, Eddie, today where?
Taylor's Pub in Nora.
So you have plenty of time to get up there to enjoy a cold beverage and listen to JMV or see JMV do the show live. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. You hear him on the mornings, the wake-up call with KB and Andy, and he has been out at Colts practice today. Kevin Bowen joining us. Kevin, we mentioned it earlier, but we'll let you recap for us specifically because you were there. Who was in and who is out for the Colts with this game against Pittsburgh?
No Quiddy Pay, no Kenny Moore. Those are the two ruled out. Again, they got hurt very late, 88th and 89th snaps of the game, respectively, against Chicago. So those two will miss. The other three, I think, that deserve some watching would be Braden Smith, Ryan Kelly, and Tyquan Lewis. Didn't look like any of the three were practicing today. All three of them, obviously in their own individual ways, are pretty darn important. It looks like those three will have some sort of uncertain status over the next 48 hours.
And in your opinion, Kevin, I know this sounds a little ridiculous, but the player of those that you are most intrigued with how they are able to fill in what they bring to the table. So in other words, the one that you think could potentially be the biggest loss would be what?
Well, honestly, I think you can make pretty strong debates for any of the three.
Yeah.
But considering the opponent of T.J. Watt, I would say Braden Smith. Now, again, if you don't have Ryan Kelly, it could be a rookie in Tanner Bortolini starting, or Danny Pinter, who hasn't played an offensive snap in the NFL in over a year. And then again, Tyquan. Right now you're missing Samson Ebukam and Quiddy Pay, your two starting defensive ends entering training camp, and Tyquan has been a really productive and important player. So. If you would ask me that question and listed those three names to me on July 1st, my answer would be different than what it is today. So, you're missing 5 defensive starters. We know that. And now, those are the three that certainly bear some watching here again over the weekend.
The Fan Zone, Kevin Bowen is our guest. You hear him on the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, 7 to 10 a.m. on these very airwaves. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter as well at KBowen107, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. KB, we discussed this earlier in the show, and we talked about it ad nauseum during the offseason of the cornerback room, the lack of depth there, the area of concern, and Chris Ballard pushed back and said, no, these guys are just young. Yeah, maybe they were inexperienced last year, but you continue to get them reps, and they're going to have a chip on their shoulder. They're going to operate well, and they're going to be a mainstay for us in some regard. I'm obviously paraphrasing there, but he seemed to not be shy of any confidence for this group. When you take Kenny Moore off the table, when Juju Brents is already off the table, when their strength in getting pressure up front appears to be severely hampered with the way the injury report now looks through 3 weeks, how would you attack the Steelers? Jake brought up the idea of bringing more pressure if you're Gus Bradley. I'm always a fan of blitz packages or making life difficult in that regard for a quarterback that's going to try to avoid mistakes. When you look at the Steelers and you look at the Colts injury report, how would you like to see them attempt to make life difficult for Justin Fields?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think a lot of people would say you blitz kind of inconsistent quarterbacks, inconsistent throwers, but a little bit of the con or a little bit of the worry when you do blitz those guys is if you aren't disciplined in your rush lanes and the Justin Fields or Anthony Richardsons of the world find an open lane, they can turn that scramble into a big, big play. So I do think that's a little bit of the dilemma with some of these guys. When you're facing again, and Fields, to be fair to him, he has not been an inconsistent thrower this year. He's been over 70%. But I do think there has to be a manufacturing of that pass rush in other ways. I think it's hard to individually rely on the bodies that you have. Now, Pittsburgh is a little banged up on the offensive line there without at least 2 starters, maybe a third. So could this be kind of a depth matchup, if you will, Pittsburgh's O-line versus your own backups on the defensive line? But without Kenny Moore, do you want more help in the secondary? Is that a little bit of the dilemma that you have with blitzing? So I think more than anything, you have to stop the run first because that is Najee Harris, and that is what Pittsburgh has done. They've ran it a ton early in the season, and one of the Colts is a rushing attack. Are they the historic, or are they this pretty stout attack we've seen over the last 3 halves of the year? That is still a question that remains to be answered. So I guess to kind of full circle answer it, you still need a ton of attention towards the run game. And then I do think on the passing downs, a balance of some pressure certainly via blitz. But again, you got to account for Fields because, he is a willing runner. And I know he didn't do a whole lot last week in that area, but just when you think you have bottled up, he can certainly create some plays.
Kevin, do you believe, and feel free to immediately say, no, Jake, I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. But I'm curious of this. And I know it's very early, and I know that we have to be patient with it, and I know that we expected this going in. And I know that he's coming off injury, which cost him an offseason. So I understand all of that. Do you believe that there's any concern anywhere within the Colts front office that Anthony Richardson, in terms of his throwing consistency, has regressed last year to this year?
Yeah, I think there has to be some confusion, I guess, if you want to throw that word in there, or an asking of why. Well, why are the numbers not at last year? And I think it's two things. One, the simple, and I guess they do bleed together a little bit, but one is just the simple accuracy. Just the, if anybody watched training camp, he actually was a more than he was last year. So, I think there would be a little bit more of like, okay, this is kind of checking in place, and you can kind of explain some things if you wanted to refer back to training camp. But again, we didn't see these interceptions, and that's probably the most alarming element is, obviously with 50% passer, 49%, whatever he is. But if he was not turning it over, I mean, you could make the argument they might be a 2-1 football team right now instead of 1-2. But I think that's where you lie with the confusion going back to last year. I asked Shane specifically on Wednesday, why the dip? What is he seeing there? And the answer is it's early. It's not necessarily, any sort of concrete evidence. It's just more chalking up time than anything. So I do think that's a question internally. And, it's kind of the hope of just if he can just get back to last year. Again, those weren't overwhelming Rookie of the Year C.J. Stroud numbers, but they were enough to get by. And I know that sounds like a weird phrase to use for a quarterback, but I think they were fine, rookie numbers for him, especially the one interception in the 170 snaps. That obviously was a great number. The 6 interceptions and 150 snaps, though, that's a disastrous recipe when you couple that in with a 50% passer.
Kevin, Jake brings up the long term there with Anthony Richardson. In the short term against the Steelers this weekend, if you're a quarterback that's struggling to get consistency, especially in short yardage throws or extending drives, this isn't exactly the defense that I would like to have next on the schedule, but that's at the mercy of schedule making in the NFL. How do they make life as comfortable as possible for Anthony Richardson and try their best to get him into some kind of rhythm so he's not having to press against one of the top defenses in the NFL?
Well, you need to continue to look like the best running back in the NFL. I mean, he's been outstanding to start this season. I mean, it's very reminiscent of 2021. And as great as that is, you can add that to the reasons to be more alarmed by Anthony Richardson early on. It's not like this is Caleb Williams with no running game and no offensive line. This is very much the opposite of that. But certainly that needs to be a staple. And then I'm curious, again, do they go a little bit more up-tempo? That has surprised me a little bit that they haven't done that a little bit more, just because I do think that is something that Richardson has shown an ability to excel in. So that would be a question that I would have. But like you said, Jimmy, I mean, this is a defense that certainly can get after you at every level. We've seen Micah Fitzpatrick and T.J. Watt, for example, make many plays against this Colts team and their respective, games against them. So, those two things, again, making sure Taylor is a staple and is really, really productive, but also making sure that, from a passing game standpoint, you're able to find some sort of rhythm and, can tempo, again, be that rhythm. I think, you have seen Richardson at times thrive in those areas, and I know that it's a weird little balance of like, wait, time of possession this, time of possession that, but still, I think that is an area that, when he says throw with intent and let it rip, I mean, those are phrases he's used this week. Can some of that come with less thinking? Can some of that come with tempo? That'll be something that I'll be watching for.
Kevin, the radio station occasionally asks our input on games that are like locks of the week that just there's no way that it's not going to happen. And I'm very selective in the way I do these things because I like being right, and usually I am. So I'm very selective. I have a game this week that is a can't miss lock, 100% guaranteed, definitely going to happen. Just shoe in. Are you ready for this?
A 1, a 2. You know what to do.
See, there you go. That's our sounder for the. No, what did we call it earlier? I can't remember the query absolute. What do we name this, Eddie?
Lock. I don't know if there was something.
I thought it was a declaration of some sort.
I think it's a declaration of definitive is what we're calling it. But either way, Kevin.
Sounds like a T-shirt.
Here we go. Zero chance.
Notre Dame, I'm going to hang up.
Zero chance. Zero with a capital Z. Like the Zips Zips tennis shoes I wore as a kid. Zero with a capital Z chance that Louisville beats Notre Dame. Notre Dame wins, beats Louisville. Zero question about it. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm scared to ask why, but I will.
I think Notre Dame, I do think that there's enough evidence that the Northern Illinois thing might have been kind of a fluke. And I like Jeff Brom a great deal, but the Louisville football to me is it's an imposter program. I just have never been totally sold. I just don't think they go into South Bend and win that game.
Well, I don't know. That sounds like past history. Brom, I just think Brom can coach circles around Marcus Freeman. I pray that this is the weather. I pray that it's windy. Lord knows Riley Leonard can't throw it from Jimmy to you when it's 80 degrees and no wind. So this is the weather that is necessary in South Bend tomorrow. So I hope and pray that it's that. But it is so weird. Like, if you combine Notre Dame's 2 scores the last 2 weeks, I mean, it's like 97-10. They've outscored 2, I guess, decently respectable opponents, 97-10, and yet here I am, like, frighteningly worried about their game tomorrow.
Oh, so I'm with you. I don't trust Riley Leonard further than he could throw a football. Like, I don't.
Yeah. I don't know.
Like,
hold on. Let's talk about trust.
That game against Miami of Ohio, that first half, it's Northern Illinois all over again.
I went to a game at Cardinal Stadium to see Louisville play Clemson. And I growing up, I always kind of liked Louisville, especially in basketball. But I went to the football game there, and 97% of the guy fans that were there were wearing chunky stitched jeans and Affliction T-shirts and little, like, butt hair mustaches. I don't trust that fan base and that program at all. There's no way they go to Notre Dame and win.
You don't need to trust the fan base to trust Brom.
I like Jeff Brom, but I'm telling you, Louisville does not go to Notre Dame and win that game. I'll be rooting for Louisville. I'll be rooting for Louisville, but there's no way. I think Notre Dame is better. I think we get hung up on the Northern Illinois game, and I think it was the anomaly, and I think Notre Dame wins
Kevin,
that
have
game.
they done anything, especially in the passing game? I guess you take Purdue's bad. That's like the Colts and the Bears. That's a wash game. What they did against Miami of Ohio, especially in that first half, brought back all kinds of flashes of, outside of Jeremiah Love, there's no real consistent offensive threat, especially from Riley Leonard.
Well, they also suffered some big injuries in that Purdue game, which I know, Jimmy, you know, but, obviously people only care about the final score in that one. So that also worries me. This sounds like Jake Query, Radio 101. You build up Notre Dame like none other. You really want them to lose. And so that will add to extra ripping on Monday when they do lose.
And then when Jimmy tries to pretend like he saw it coming, he gets ripped for, of course he saw it coming.
When Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame, did I make fun of it on here? I don't think so.
I don't know that I was. I can't remember if I was in for that show or not. It's all blurring together of new fatherhood.
I think I said that Northern Illinois got jobbed with the worst third down call in the history of football.
And they did.
I'm telling you,
yes,
it's a lock. Okay,
O'Malley was the head official on that one. Yeah.
Kevin, I would like to know what your son went with who this week.
Well, for the first time all year, he did not go with the horseshoe. The Pittsburgh helmet certainly is a black helmet. It certainly has other colors on it. I don't know if he was drawn to that, but he was very decisive. The video a bit more drawn out than his recent one. So he was not particularly fully clothed in this one. I don't know if that contributed to it, but yeah, he knows that Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season, I guess.
He was not particularly fully clothed. Now, is particularly a relevant word to this?
Right. I mean, he had diaper and socks on. I wouldn't endorse anyone over the age of 2.5 to be going to that wardrobe. But yeah, that's what he was rocking. I don't know if the no shirt, no rules came into play here. So he had some struggling moments. You know, he was wearing a shark pajama outfit last week, so he wanted what he calls chompers. So he's using little tongs, and motor skills maybe aren't the highest at that age. So he kind of fumbled a little bit with the helmets. Maybe we could be leading to a tie or something along those lines, given it. But yes, he has gone with the Pittsburgh Steelers here in Week 4.
Pittsburgh to me is intriguing, Kevin, because they're 3-0, obviously, but they're not. They are winning with a simple formula. They're not turning the football over. They can run the ball. I don't know that their aerial Pickens is a good player, but I don't know that really necessarily jumps out at you. You talked about the fact that defensively they've got obviously playmakers, but to me, it's not an overly, intimidating 3-0. Does that make sense? I know 3-0 is 3-0, don't get me wrong, but it's not like Pittsburgh necessarily is overly wowing you.
Yeah, they're not sexy. They don't run away from you. They're not dominant by any means, especially offensively. As weird as this sounds, I feel like Mike Tomlin, like the man is turned on by one possession games. I mean, he's just we are going to thrive in this moment, and he fully embraces this week to week mantra, and it's why he's been and will be a first ballot Hall of Fame coach one day. So that's what I think. I mean, I picked the Colts this morning. I will say the injury report's given me a little bit of pause with that, but I just feel like at some point it's going to catch up with Pittsburgh. They win and they kick all these field goals week 1. Last week they catch a break with Justin Herbert being banged up. Is Justin Fields really a 73% passer, whatever he's been this season? Again, their injury situation is starting to add up as well. So, they have not been, if you rank the 5-5-0 teams, you probably would get some people that would have them. No one would pick them above Kansas City or Buffalo as the most impressive so far. But every time I say that, I think we just naturally are quick to write off Pittsburgh and that, they don't have great quarterback play. They're not going to do anything in the playoffs yet. Every season you give the standings at the end of the year, there they are with 9 or 10 or 11 wins. But I don't think they're the most potent bunch by any means.
Is there an area outside of the injuries that the Colts are dealing with defensively that you feel like has maybe been understated over the last couple of days? And by that, I mean, we talked about their running defense basically getting revitalized against a mediocre offensive team in the Chicago Bears. And the other 2 weeks, we've seen the likes of Joe Mixon and Josh Jacobs run all over them. It sounds like Najee Harris is fine. It was just a rest thing, and he's going to be ready to go. Where's maybe an area defensively of this team that we've not highlighted enough that either could pose a turning point or could be another area of concern for the Colts going into Sunday?
Well, I don't know if I'm totally answering the question, Jimmy, but these things pop into my mind when you ask that. I think a hat tip to Nick Cross and Jalen Jones, 2 guys that came into the year with question marks on them, and in Cross's case has played very solidly, very sound tackler through the first 3 weeks. Jones, I don't think it was perfect for him last week, but those interceptions were huge in a one possession game where Chicago moved it. I mean, Chicago went up and down the field rather, I shouldn't say easily, but they definitely had. I mean, they had more drives in the Colts territory. Colts had in Bears territory. You needed to make those plays, and Jones provided that. So I would say hat tip to them. And then the other thing I would say is this might not be the worst week in the world to have Kenny Moore out. I mean, it's unfair I'm saying that, and I don't want this to come as a shot at Kenny because I think he's a great, important player. But, I mean, can the common NFL fan name Pittsburgh wideouts, not name George Pickens? Probably not. If you were to stop me on the street last Friday and say, give me 3 Pittsburgh Steelers wideouts, I would have said Hines Ward and Plaxico Burress. I mean,
Right.
I'd have no idea that Scotty Miller and Calvin Austin are their other wideouts, and I don't know, I'm probably forgetting somebody. So, this is, I guess what I'm getting at, this is not Houston's wideout group or, something like that where, again, being super reliant on the depth at corner is critical. So that would be something that's on my mind. Having said all of that, I mean, Arthur Smith is their new OC. I know his head coaching career certainly didn't work out. But I think the Colts think pretty highly of him as an offensive coordinator. He certainly coached circles around the Colts last year in that game in Atlanta. And I thought he did a nice job with Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. So maybe the Justin Fields thing is a little bit more here to stay.
Kevin, do you think – I thought Jalen Jones was obviously really good last week, right? Young player. I love his athleticism. I thought he showed on his second interception just the athleticism of that play, the hand-eye coordination, all of it. I mean, but is he kind of – and I'm only asking this because he's a young player. Is Jalen Jones a cornerback version of Anthony Richardson? And by that I mean we can get wowed by those plays, but is that masking what is a difficulty and should be the ordinary on others? Or is he consistently pretty darn good?
No, I mean, I actually thought Sunday, again, he had two spectacular plays. I thought there was some inconsistency. And, frankly, over 90 snaps of football, that should probably be expected. But, he missed a couple of tackles in the open field. He did have a pass interference penalty that, I think some thought it was a little nitpicky, but I think anytime you go over the top and you make early contact, they're probably going to call it. What I guess for those that are unfamiliar with the Jones story, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, and certainly you saw some 5-star athleticism, like you said on that interception. Went to Texas A&M. Some people thought maybe safety there, and then didn't have a very consistent career, but again, the intangibles and the athleticism and the frame, I think it were a big reason why he was a 7th-round pick. And then, again, he had a really nice rookie season, I think, especially when you consider where he was drafted. But consistency, I think, needs to be there. And probably just an uptick in playmaking. I think, the Colts, I don't think have been tested too much, especially here in the last 2 weeks, I should say, from obviously experienced quarterbacks. But outside of Jones's 2 picks, I still think they just lack playmaking in the secondary. Like, they need to get their hands on more footballs. And that's why I thought Jalen was so critical what he did on Sunday, but that was definitely missing against C.J. Stroud and against Malik Willis. So I think that'll continue to be a thing to watch. But, again, it's not like you look at the upcoming quarterbacks and, if you're starting these guys in fantasy, you got bigger issues. So this is not, I think in November they have a stretch of like Jared Goff, Josh Allen, and Aaron Rodgers. The next couple of weeks, they certainly have an opportunity on paper to, face some subpar throwing quarterbacks, albeit Justin Fields has been much better than that here early in the season.
Monday morning at 7 o'clock, Kevin and Andy will be recapping the Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers. They also will be praising my clairvoyance based on the fact they'll be talking about a Notre Dame win over the Cardinals of Louisville that will take place this weekend as well. Kevin, we appreciate it as always. Enjoy the weekend, all right?
The Friday Notre Dame jinx. There goes any chance I had of sleeping well tonight.
You and me both.
Hey, they got a big basketball recruit, Kevin. Come on. I mean, be happy about that, right?
They did, yeah. I had my shirt off for about 12 minutes.
That's why Max was not clothed. He saw you on Thursday morning on the show. That's where we got it from.
That's exactly
felt
right.
a little odd to have my shirt off for a 17-year-old, so I apologize for that.
Did you bring in donuts for that again? What was the occasion when with you and I, there was an occasion where you came in with, it's when they got Shrewsbury, right? You came in with no shirt on and brought donuts.
Yeah, they got some longs and some Shrewsbury in there. Yeah. 3 hours, you got to look.
Speaking of not sleeping, I just got my first winks after that about 2 weeks ago. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Kevin, enjoy the weekend.
We had someone comment, looks like We Grow Hair Indy's gone to other parts of Kevin's body.
That's a good one.
That's when I knew I probably should put the shirt back on.
That's right. The hair starts moving to different parts of the body once you get older. Thanks, Kevin. Kevin Bowen in the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Last night, very cool event that I was fortunate enough to be involved in Carmel, and it reinforced kind of the second half of 2 situations that kind of tie into one another that just gave me a little pep, I guess. Feel good feeling. And I thought, you know what? This is perfect for our Franciscan health. Feel good, good for the Heart Friday, and that's next. text message from one of my teachers growing up that said, Jake, I just scheduled my heart scan, which I love hearing that because that's the whole purpose of the Feel Good, Good for the Heart Fridays from Franciscan Health, is not only telling you a story that I found to be touching, but also to remind people of the importance of getting that heart scan, especially, by the way, if you have been over the course of your life, if you are in one of these risk factor categories, high blood pressure or cholesterol, if you have diabetes, obesity, you're a current or former smoker, especially if you're over the age of 40, or if you simply have a family heart history like I did of heart disease, then you want to make sure that you are being preventative and aware when it comes to your cardiovascular health. And what better place to do that than with Franciscan Health? Number one heart program in Indiana for cardiology by Health Grades. Number one in Indiana for interventional coronary care and major cardiac surgery by CareChex. And they offer affordable heart scans for just $49. This is non-invasive. It's very easy to do. You can self-refer, you can pay out of pocket, and you get a free heart health risk assessment with every single screening. So you can find out just how much calcium you might have within the arteries of your heart and take that first step towards heart health. Because believe you me, I mentioned it before, my left arm went completely numb at the time that I had a 100% blockage of the widowmaker, and you do not want to go through that. I was very fortunate that I was able to get care quickly. But I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that and doing what they can for a healthy heart. And sometimes I see a story that actually, for myself, makes me reminds me that I do still have a working heart because it touches my heart. And I think, you know what, that's a feel-good story, and I want to share it with people. This one I noticed from the Indianapolis Star, our friends at the Indianapolis Star this week, about volleyball at Hamilton Southeastern. Now, Hamilton Southeastern in volleyball is a power. Two-time defending 4A champions. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to transfer into Hamilton Southeastern if you're a volleyball player and try to make that roster because they already are loaded. And then imagine that you are transferring, not even realizing that after 3 years of playing at a different school, that you are going into a situation where you don't even know, A, if you're going to make the roster, even though you've been a really good player and you have the opportunity to play collegiately at Mercer down in Georgia. I believe Mercer is in Macon, Georgia. This is the case with Bella DeForn of Hamilton Southeastern, who had been at Lawrence North and a 3-year starter in volleyball. Everything was going along. Think about the excitement that goes into your senior year of high school and coming off of your junior year. I personally thought junior year was the best. And then you go into the senior year, all that excitement that goes into it. But there was a morning this past May where Bella, her siblings were out doing other things. Her parents were gone. She was home alone. And all of a sudden, she felt like something was off, and she heard some noises and saw some sensations that forced her to go into the kitchen, and that's when she realized that, not sure what the cause was, but the kitchen of her house was on fire. And her first thought was instinctively to make sure that all of her siblings were safe. So she ran upstairs and ran around to make sure that everybody was okay. Realized then, because she had been sleeping and she was awake, kind of came to her senses and realized that she was home alone. So she managed to get to a neighbor's house to call 911, call the fire department, call her mother, and fortunately get the pets out, and everything was okay in terms of life itself. But life had changed. So Bella's family finds that now all of a sudden they are out of a home due to this house fire. The home was able to be rebuilt, but it's going to be a lengthy process. And, of course, you go through insurance and everything else that comes with that. You can imagine the headache and the heartache that comes with all of that, of losing possessions as well. The important thing is the most important possessions were there, but nonetheless, her family had to find a new place to live, which they were able to do to find a new residence while their house was being refurbished and the insurance was being worked through. But that doesn't mean that it's easy, especially at that age. And Bella had the choice. She could either continue to commute to Lawrence North, a very far distance now with the new home, or she could transfer within where she lived to Hamilton Southeastern, a volleyball power. She opted for the latter and was very apprehensive about how that would be, but the Hamilton Southeastern volleyball community welcomed her in. She's a top 60 recruit. But aside from that, just the journey itself, if you think that it was just because of the fact that she's a volleyball talent that she was able to be embraced by a new school and new teammates, that wasn't it. The community gathered together. They did a GoFundMe. They raised the money to be able to help pay for the insurance and some of the things and the moving that goes into it. And they did it because they rallied together, all based on the spirit of sport. And that's the beauty of sport, is it makes you have teammates that sometimes aren't even those that are on your team to begin with. And Bella is thriving at Hamlin Southeastern. She's on the volleyball team, and she's a part of that community, while Lawrence North also continues to root for her, knowing that it was at no fault of hers or her family, the situations that caused her family to be displaced. And I was thinking about that last night when I went and had the pleasure and the honor of being able to MC, along with Derek Schultz, an event for Family Promise. The Home Sweet Home event, as it's called. And Family Promise is an organization that utilizes a number of different organizations around central Indiana, notably churches in different areas, that allows for temporary housing for those families who have found themselves without a roof over their head. And folks, I can tell you, I've done a lot of work with homeless people, and I know the stereotypes. I know the stigma. Nobody chooses to be homeless. There are so many different circumstances that go into putting people in that position. And the one thing that I found over the course of doing a number of different lunches and interviews with people who have found themselves living without a home, childhood trauma was such a common theme. But people aren't always looking for, you think they're looking for a handout. They're often not. They're looking for a hand up. They're looking for somebody to lift them up. And Family Promise takes individuals and families that need that lift, and it facilitates for housing, whether it be through apartments or whether it be through different church organizations in different places, to enable families to have a place to live until they can get back their feet on the ground. And last year, the first year that I emceed the fundraiser for Family Promise, the Home Sweet Home event, I was introduced to Portia Phillips, who at that time was kind of the feature, if you will, person that they were using to share the story, because Portia had an inspiring story of fleeing domestic violence and situations and circumstances that are beyond what a lot of people would ever be able to overcome. Kind of like Bella, where circumstances change in the blink of an eye. But Portia last year, when we did that fundraiser and I was seated at her table, was telling me about how her goal was to find housing so that she could begin going back to school and trying to train herself to get a CDL license, in her dream of being a local driver for a trucking company that would enable her to have the stability and the income for her kids and her family. And that was a year ago. And I went last night and I walked into this event, some probably 500 or 600 people, nearly $100,000 raised for Family Promise. And one of the first faces I saw, I said, that woman looks familiar. And I walked up and it was Portia Phillips. And I said, holy cow, I remember you from a year ago, and you were one that this program was trying to give that hand up, not hand out. And I said, how are things going? And she said, you know what? I'll tell you how things are going. I have a job now with a trucking company in Indianapolis. I got my CDL license, and I'm proud to say that as of a few months ago, for the first time in my life, for my family, I am now a home owner with a home of my very own. And I realized that it takes sometimes a village and a community for people to believe in people and lift them up and get them on the ground. And sometimes that's all that people need. So when you think about the stigma and you think about the stereotype and you think about the fact that person wants a handout, maybe they're like Portia, maybe they're like Bella, maybe circumstances just change for them overnight, and it takes a village, a community to realize and embrace and accept those people as your teammate and rallying around them. And for both of them, I'm thrilled to say that things are obviously going in the right direction. And that's what the spirit of sport and the spirit of community can do. And that's why I still believe this is the best community that anybody can live in here in this country. We'll come back. We'll get Jimmy's plays of the day and talk a little Indiana football as well on the other side.
So today, leading into the massive sports weekend, we'll start first in baseball. We'll lay 1.5 on the run line on the Detroit Tigers as they host the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox successfully sweeping the Los Angeles Angels and staving off
can't even
becoming
lose correctly.
the losingest team in MLB history. So we'll see if that happens tonight. I think it does. I think the Tigers win. They've been red hot, and they'll cover the 1.5 on the run line as well. Switching gears towards the weekend, we'll lay 7 on the Indiana Hoosiers on the spread against Maryland. That kicking off at 12 o'clock tomorrow. Later in the evening on Saturday, give me Georgia to win on the road over Alabama. In the National Football League, I'll take the Baltimore Ravens to win on the money line over the Buffalo Bills. Also lay 4.5 for the Cincinnati Bengals. They're favored by 4.5 on the road against the Carolina Panthers. I think they cover that number. My last play goes into Colts-Steelers, so I'll save that for our predictions. Eddie, any plays from you?
You know, Jimmy, I got you last night on the spread with Dallas.
Well, it pushed.
No, it didn't.
It was
5.5.
I gave 5 yesterday. You can check the tape. It was 5. It pushed. So maybe you gave 5.5, but I had a push
Whatever,
on that
you still
department.
lost.
It's a push. It's
you
not a
didn't
loss.
win, so you lost.
All right. So did you
So
then, by
I
that
will be
logic.
taking. No, I won. I had 5.5.
Oh, you gave 5.5 on
Yes,
your end.
yes,
Okay.
yes, I
All
did.
right.
I don't need. I need the hook there. I don't like copping out. Anyway,
I didn't.
I will be taking Alabama against Georgia. I like the weather conditions. I think it favors Bama with Jalen Milroe, and then they have the complimentary backs. I wonder if they're going to be able to throw the ball a ton, and that's what Georgia really relies on with Carson Beck. And the run game hasn't really taken off yet. So my only bet this weekend is the Crimson
You
Tide.
take Bama over Georgia. All right. Those are your plays of the day.
By the way, real quick, I'm going to read you guys the games featuring top 25 teams this week, and I want you to tell me which one is the second most expensive, because UGA Bama is. I'm going on secondary ticket prices. You ready? Vatech Miami, Kentucky Ole Miss, Minnesota Michigan, Oak State, Kansas State, BYU at Baylor, Wisconsin at USC, Louisville at Notre Dame, Arkansas at A&M, Mississippi State at Texas, Ohio State at Michigan State, Stanford at Clemson, Penn State, and who's Penn State playing this weekend? It's not doesn't matter. It's not a factor. Washington State and Boise State, Arizona, Utah, and Oregon, UCLA. What is the second most expensive game to go to?
I'll say Wisconsin at USC.
Eddie, you got a guess?
Notre Dame, Louisville.
Washington State at Boise State, $150 in the door. Yeah.
Wow.
Like, okay. Colts predictions. I keep going back and forth on this, but I feel like Pittsburgh has kind of been playing with fire, and I think they can score some points, but I'm going to give one more week benefit of the doubt for the Colts offensively. I say the Colts win 24-18.
I think this is the perfect storm in terms of all the struggles of Anthony Richardson being put on display against this havoc-driven Pittsburgh Steelers defense. The injuries all across the defense for the Colts, especially their selling point of getting home for pass rush, scares me across the board. I think this is an ugly game that ends up going Pittsburgh's way by 11 points, 26-15. Steelers beat the Colts.
Eddie?
I took the Steelers 19-10 over the Colts.
Okay. John is up next. He is at Taylor's, right?
Yes, in Nora.
Taylor's Pub in Nora. Plenty of time to get up and see him. Drive carefully this weekend, everybody. We will talk to you at noon on Monday.